Hej och välkomna tillbaka till Erik Penser Banks Bolagsdag. Nu har det blivit dags för Ascelia Pharma och Magnus Corfitzen att ta ett litet samtal här i sofforna. Welcome Magnus.
Yeah, thank you. Pleasure to be here.
Yeah, nice to have you here also. For investors not familiar with the Ascelia story, can you just tell us a little about your company and what you do?
Absolutely. Yeah. So Ascelia Pharma is an emerging pharma company. We have global headquarters in Malmö in Sweden. And our mission is to improve the life of people living with rare cancer conditions by developing new drugs that will give them a better life, so to speak. Right now we are in the final development phase of our lead program, Orviglance. It is in a phase 3 clinical trial. And if the results are successful, we believe that we have the data to get the product on the market in the US and Europe. So that's our key focus. We also have another program for the treatment of gastric cancer, stomach cancer, which is ready for phase 2 development. So, really, a strong mission, strong team that work to improve the life of people with great need for better medicine.
Interesting. And if we start with your first product, Orviglance, can you tell us a little about the medical need for a product like this? Why do we need this new generation of contrast agent?
Yeah, absolutely. So cancer is a devastating disease, and one of the very unfortunate characteristics of cancer is its ability to spread from one organ to another. Those cancer types that spread, they are called metastasis, is much more aggressive disease, and the prognosis for the patient survival is much less good. So whenever a patient is diagnosed with cancer, it's paramount to diagnose, to do medical imaging, to see has the cancer spread to other organs. The liver is the organ where cancer most frequently spreads to, and therefore the liver is very important to look at for medical imaging. And today you can do liver imaging, but the problem is that to get the best quality and the best accuracy in the imaging, you need to give the patient a diagnostic drug or a contrast agent. So the patient today will be injected with a gadolinium-based product. Gadolinium is a toxic heavy metal, so the manufacturers have worked to sort of encapsulate the gadolinium in a chemical structure to reduce toxicity. And in most patients it works well. And then it goes through the kidneys with the urine and leaves the patient a little bit of gadolinium deposition in the body, but most patients it's no problem. A completely different story that every year tons of gadolinium is excreted into the environment, but that's a different story. But this is the standard of care. This is what you do with patients today, every day, thousands of times every day. The problem is patients with poor kidney function. They are very slow in excreting. It takes a long time for the gadolinium to leave the body through the kidneys and go to the urine and out of the body. And when the gadolinium is in the body for a long time, risk of serious conditions increase. And that's why there's a black box warning on all gadolinium products, a big warning on the product label that says the gadolinium can cause nephrogenic systemic fibrosis, which is a potentially fatal side effect. What we are doing with Orviglance, this was a long explanation to just provide the context. What we are doing with Orviglance is that we have, you could say, first in class, and so far only in class. Instead of gadolinium, we use manganese. Manganese is natural trace element. It's something we have in our bodies. It's needed for certain enzymatic processes. It's even found in food, like pineapple and blueberries, so just in extremely small amount compared to our dosing. So what we do with Orviglance is we have this powder that we mix in water and the patient will drink it. So no injection, just drink, and then the patient will have a high quality scan. So we have an orphan drug designation for use in patients undergoing liver MRI with poor kidney function, because they really have the choice today between doing an unenhanced scan with inferior image quality, and doctors cannot make the best and most appropriate decisions, or they can take the risk of potentially fatal side effects from what is out there today. That's not a good prospect for these patients. We can give them the best of both worlds with a safe and effective use of Orviglance for them.
Mm. And so far, you've seen encouraging efficacy studies in patients.
Yeah.
And you're currently in a phase 3 trial, a global phase 3 trial. Can you tell us a little bit about how the patient recruitment is going and when you expect to be finished with this?
Yeah, so we expect to complete the patient enrollment this year. And then after the patient enrollment has been completed, then we need to look at the last images and then you could say lock the database and QC it, and then we have the top line results. So we started the study very late 2019, early 2020, which was just before COVID, which was in hindsight a terrible timing. And that's why we've also announced several times that we unfortunately had delays. Now COVID is in a better situation. We've also adapted the trial design a little bit to be more functional during COVID and also without COVID. So we are optimistic, working very hard to complete the trial enrollment this year.
And if the results are positive, you're gonna send an NDA to the FDA and EMA, and you're also gonna commercialize it by yourself in the US.
Yeah,
that's the plan. Where are you now in this journey, and what are the next steps, so to say, in the journey to take it to market yourself?
Yeah, so we are making. I mean, launch in pharmaceuticals is really a long process because when we launch, we need to make sure we have educated the medical community that they understand here is a new product that will solve an issue for some patients. That option was not available before. That is not something we can, we need to, you could say, publish our results, speak at conferences about the results of Orviglance. That is something that is well underway. We need to continue and increase the amount of publications on our agent. All of these things to make sure that once we get the approval, the medical community will be anxious to get us to start using it. For them to start use it, there's also a payment, and increasingly important in the pharmaceutical business over the last 10, 20, 30 years has been the you would say the reimbursement and the market access. We have done a lot of work in that space, and we continue to do that. We engage with the payers, so the healthcare systems that actually decide whether they will pay for it. In Sweden, there's one national payer. In the US, where we are going to launch, it's a lot of private payers, health insurance companies, and then you have some governmental programs like Medicare and Medicaid. And all of them we need to reach an agreement with, that they will cover the cost. They will cover the cost if Orviglance provides the value. And we are in you could say, in dialogue and doing analysis to find out what exactly do they want to see. How can we agree on a price that brings value to the healthcare system, so it will be more effective, cost effective, and also be a solid business for us. And we've seen very encouraging results, and we have some of that we have shared with the outside community. Some of that we keep to ourselves for competitive reasons. But I would say we are very encouraged by the results and the dialogue we're having.
Right. And you have communicated a market potential of some $500 to $600 million annually for this product. How did you calculate these numbers?
Yeah, so it's a good question, and it's very complicated because we're launching in a market where there is no product today. So we cannot go, buy a market report and say, okay, this is the number. So we used several different methodologies. We looked at how many patients. When we looked at how many patients have cancer, how many of those have cancer in the liver, and so forth. Then we reached an estimate. We've also looked at more recently, you could say, looked into databases where you can actually track how many liver imaging procedures are being done for cancer in patients with poor kidney function, which is really the target. And the level of granularity we have there is really we can see which hospitals are performing these procedures for this patient, even the radiologist doing the procedure. So that gives us a huge database, but then obviously we can you can slice and dice the data structure and see which hospitals have the majority of our patients, which hospitals do not have any patients or almost no patients. And the outcome of that gives us a very good understanding of the volume of patients, but also the location. That helps us in terms of planning the commercial team that we need. We estimate around 40 people, 40 people in the US at launch, including a back office staff. And we can cover the 400 hospitals, 400 accounts, which have around 75% of the target patients in the US. So at launch, that's going to be extremely good coverage and in a good position to create a great launch.
Right. So if you're successful, it's actually possible to assume that you in a few years will sell for this product will sell for a couple of $100 million, perhaps, if you capture a large share of the market, so to say.
Yeah, absolutely. We're not providing any revenue guidance,
No.
but we think we're doing the launch in the US because we think there's so much value to be created there. We think it's not easy to do a launch, but increasingly, an increasing share of the new pharma product launches in the US are being done by first-time launchers. That means the whole infrastructure in terms of, you could say, consultants and collaborating service providers to help us with the logistics and everything needed for the launch, that is in place. It's a completely different situation compared to 10, 15 years ago. So we will capitalize on that, have a very cost-effective setup, but invest the resources in the right activities to drive penetration.
Right. And what kind of margins can we expect from a business like this, both in terms of gross margins and EBIT margins?
Yeah, so it's I would say we've not communicated, especially on around this. What we've communicated earlier is that we have with Orviglance we expect typical gross margins for like small molecule therapeutic products. So typically that's in the 90% plus range, and we think we're in that ballpark. And then a relatively limited commercial infrastructure, obviously marketing budgets, etc. But when we do the analysis, then it looks like a very interesting business opportunity, which is why we choose to go that route.
Right. And are you currently in any partnering discussions for Orviglance in other areas, such as Europe and Japan?
So you're right that we have communicated we want to go alone, build our own team in the US. In Europe and Japan, rest of the world, we want to partner. Sort of as a principle, we don't communicate whether we are in discussions or any further activity there. But we are out there making known to the entire world that Orviglance is on its way. We're presenting at the conferences, and that is getting attention. So that's completely in line with the plan that we have laid out, and building a strong commercial part of Ascelia, as well as a strong development arm that we already have.
Right. And it has not been very common before that smaller Swedish and Nordic companies have commercialized themselves in the US. What challenges and possibilities do you see in a business model like this?
I think the opportunity to retain more of the value, I think that is the driving factor. If you look at, looking back at the biotech industry for the last 20 years, the companies that have really succeeded have been the ones that have commercialized their own products. There are a few who started out with a major licensing deal on a multi-blockbuster that, provided them with the revenue, the royalty stream that allowed them to build, you could say, the next level in the pipeline, and then have the financial capabilities to launch that product themselves. If you're looking at a company completely out of our league, but like Genmab in Denmark, started out with a very attractive partnership deal, and that is giving them the financial muscle to do something on their own. So the way to retain value and build further shareholder value is to keep the commercial infrastructure in-house. But sometimes it's more capital efficient to do a partnership. So it depends on the indication. And with Orviglance, it's a small team we need. That is doable. It's not going to be easy, but it's doable. And if we do a partnership, we share a significant part of the value with a partner, which is good because you reduce risk. But potentially you get some other risk factors because it will be one product in a portfolio, and that you risk having sort of a deprioritization of the asset in the hands of the partner. Whereas with us in the US, Orviglance is number one. There's nothing else to prioritize for commercial.
Right. And it's also very, very reasonable to do this in the orphan space, right?
Yeah, exactly. And that's why the analysis I mentioned before, that 400 hospitals or hospital accounts, they have 75% of the patients. If we had to go to every single general practitioner, ordinary doctor, that would have been completely impossible. But this is a very concentrated sales effort, and that's why we believe it's feasible.
Right. Okay, so if we jump over to your other pipeline project, Oncoral, is an oral formulation of the well-known chemotherapy irinotecan.
Yeah.
What is the status for this product currently?
Yeah, so we are ready to start phase 2 development. We have got the IND approved. We've also got the local approvals in Spain and UK, where we were the sites that we are planning, where the phase 2 study is slated to start. What we communicated in the last quarterly report, the Q1 report, was that we are delaying the patient enrollment initiation. We're postponing that because right now we had, our previous expectation was that Sparkle was completed by now. So if we are to initiate that phase 2 program, it would literally mean that I would take people who are working intensely on Sparkle, the Orviglance phase 3 program, and allocate time on the Oncoral program. To me, that is not the right decision. I want to, now the time is to keep the gas pedal in, full down on the Orviglance Sparkle study, and not start to take, the foot on the gas, off the gas and start hitting the brake. That's completely wrong. So that's the decision. So we are working with some, top tier oncologists, some very good sites. We have this, you would say, clinical collaboration with Taiho Oncology, who are manufacturing Lonsurf, which is another tablet therapy for gastric cancer. We think that combination is really, really interesting, and so do they. So I'm super excited about the study and the opportunity, but I think timing is we need to control the timing, and we need to complete Sparkle and not defocus on getting the other very exciting study started as well.
What is the reason that you chose gastric cancer as the first indication?
So we looked at a number of cancer diseases where we thought irinotecan plays a role based on the knowledge from the medical community, and we wanted to go into a new indication. Then, irinotecan intravenously is approved in colorectal cancer and also one form in pancreatic cancer. By going into a new indication, the clinical development pathway we think is simpler. But on the other hand, we have a lot of published literature that shows irinotecan is effective in gastric cancer. It's not approved, but there's sort of clinical proof of concept that it's likely to succeed. So we reduce the development risk significantly. And together with Lonsurf, which is another tablet therapy, then we can have an all-oral tablet therapy for this patient segment of gastric cancer. And this is a very aggressive cancer form. The life expectancy after diagnosis is unfortunately relatively short. If you can have an all-oral therapy where patients can stay at home, have improved their quality of life compared to spending more time in the hospital in the limited time they have left, I think that's a major benefit for patient care. And what we've seen from preclinical models, the combination of Lonsurf and irinotecan looks very encouraging. So we think this is a very attractive combination, both in terms of driving efficacy and safety, but also from a, you could say, patient well-being perspective.
Is it also from an angle of having a rare disease, so to say. It's an orphan indication, that it's easier to get to market in this disease.
Yeah, that's also been an important part of the analysis because we really looked at all the factors. One is obviously the unmet medical need, which is number 1, 2, and 3. We really need to make sure if and when Oncoral comes to market, it's in an indication where it makes a difference to patients. Otherwise, everything else is just insignificant. So that we strongly feel is in the gastric cancer. It's also, as you mentioned, potential for orphan condition, which gives certain benefits. The development, because the prognosis is so depressingly poor, it allows, you could say, the trial design of a different magnitude than for some other cancer indications where you need to do many hundreds of patients, if not thousands of patients in the clinical development program, and have trials running for 4 years before you get overall survival readout. We think that is that's a different calculation in gastric cancer, but obviously a more aggressive cancer type.
Right. And irinotecan is actually already approved in Japan for the treatment of the gastric cancer.
Yeah.
What is the reason that it's approved in Japan and not in Europe and US?
Yeah, you could say for a drug to be approved, you need to have the data to the authorities. And typically in Japan, they have local data. That's a typical requirement. And irinotecan was approved, if I recall correctly, sort of in the late 1990s. And back in those days, around the world, not only in Japan but elsewhere, the stringency of the data required for approval was less than it is today. And there might have been, I don't know, there might have been sort of a Japanese study in gastric cancer patients that showed some efficacy, and that was the reason why. So you're absolutely right. It is approved in Japan, not in Europe and US. But again, to me, it just tells me that the development risk is much lower because there's been some good data. Otherwise, it would not have been approved in Japan.
Right. That seems like a fair assumption.
Yeah.
So, speaking of your collaboration with Taiho, what do you believe is the most reasonable way forward here? Obviously, I might think that you're looking for a partnership with them in the future.
That's one opportunity. We have a partnership, a small partnership that could be expanded. I think the potential of Oncoral is quite significant. It can go. Now we're starting in gastric cancer because we can get some very interesting phase 2 data, progression-free survival data in a reasonable time frame. But there's also potential in a number of other tumor types, and obviously a phase 3 program is quite expensive. You could say when one of the irinotecan programs was a phase 3 program in pancreatic cancer. It's 400 patients, so it's a significant investment. And a pharma partner there would be nice to sort of manage the financial risk in that. So, but I think just bring it all the way to market, but also moving into other indications. I think the potential is extremely significant for Oncoral, and with a very attractive risk profile. I think that's a combination we like very much in Ascelia.
So you could perhaps look at the indications where Lonsurf is approved, and then there might be an effect or an possibility to make a combination therapy.
Absolutely, and also there could be other oral therapies that we could combine with in other cancer indications. Could also be, who knows, that one could speculate, because it is speculation, but that there are indications that Lonsurf might want to go into where the combination with Oncoral would be interesting to support efficacy in that indication. So that's one of the that's one of the reasons we are dedicated to oncology in Ascelia Pharma. There's so much unmet medical need. There are so many new ways to improve the life of people with this terrible diagnosis.
Right. The time has gone very fast here, I think, but a final question. Where do you see Ascelia Pharma in 5 years?
So Ascelia Pharma in 5 years is completely different from where it is today. So, our plans is to build our commercial team in the US. That will be around 40 people. This will come within the next couple of years. Maybe at that point it will be even more people. In 5 years, probably even more people in the U.S. And also our team in Malmö today is around 25 people. That will also have at least doubled. So we are thinking very much in terms of how do we prepare ourselves for that kind of growth? How do we make Ascelia Pharma as an organization more scalable in terms of everything from IT systems and infrastructure and processes to ensure that we can go from. I mean, when I joined 8 years ago, there was 1 employee, and then I came on board. Now we're 25, and the last few years we've doubled in size every year. And that's kind of the curve that we will continue on. We're doing it in a very sort of cost-conscious manner. We need to make sure we want to have the data. We're not recruiting any full-time staff in the US until we have the phase 3 data. So we know that we're not investing too aggressively in terms of the, you could say, the launch and so forth. We want to do it, bring the right people in at the right time to prepare for a very successful journey and minimize financial risk.
Right, that sounds reasonable. Thank you very much. It was nice to have this conversation with you.
Yeah, thank you, Ludvig. I really enjoyed it.